Welcome to the Ultimate Farm Wife podcast. On this channel, we're going to be discussing all things marrying a farmer, moving to the land, and becoming integrated with a family farming operation. Whether you're moving to the farm for the first time or whether you're moving back into a family farming operation, we discuss the ins and the outs of all of it. So let's jump into today's episode. Hi, and welcome to the farm. Today we're talking with Jenny. Welcome, Jen.
Hi. How are you, Katja?
Well, thank you. So, Jen, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your family, and your farm?
Yeah, hi for all the rural mum listeners out there. My name is Jen. I am first and foremost a mum to two beautiful little boys, Eddie and Charles. I am married to Farmer Chris, as we affectionately call him, and we live on a farm just outside of Armidale. I think the locality is called Uralla. It's just below Armidale, but most people will know Armidale for its affiliation with the University of New England. And we're on a mixed grazing property. We have two blocks, one we live on and one that's about 40 or 50 k's as the crow flies. Further down towards Walcha, people might know that area as well. That's a bit about us. I'm a mental health clinician. I have a Master's of Social Work, and as a Monique Cormack might say, I'm a failed lawyer. So I started off with a Bachelor of Law and did that for a little while and practiced and hated my life so badly. Just couldn't come to that calling. I think idolizing law and the idea of it and thinking you can do some good and then actually being in it as a practice is a little different. And so I did the Masters of Social Work and then have done all of the extra qualifications and skills and training to specialise in perinatal and paediatrics. I run a private practice up here in the Hunter, New England. I run outreach clinics out to Inverell quite often, and I actually have my own podcast associated with some research and guest lecturing I do with UNE.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the ways that we met, because I have guested on your podcast before.
You have.
So I will link that in the show notes for any of our community who would like to go back and listen to that, and who would also like to link up with Jen on that side of what we do. So, Jen, can you also tell me how you met your farmer and how you moved to your mixed grazing properties?
So, I'm from Wagga Wagga originally. I'm off a farm down there. My dad was a farmer and a research tech at Charles Sturt University with the Department of Primary Industries. And so regional, rural, remote living was always probably part of my grain. I never really wanted to go to the city, despite my parents probably really wanting to send me off to a boarding school. So when it came down to picking where I was going to go to university, it was a no-brainer. It was going to be either Southern Cross on the coast, which I really didn't see myself as much of a coastie, or University of New England, because realistically it's the only other place in New South Wales that you can study law in a regional setting. And it made sense because UNE has an amazing rating for its college experience, and the collegiality that is there is just insane. I think the best way to describe it is probably think of what an American system is, and that you've got UNE. It's really strong. These people become your family and best friends. And it's amazing. So many people from college marry each other, and it also becomes your network of people. So like our financial advisor is a guy I went to university with, and he married one of my best friends, and our accountant comes from college, and it's all a bit of a mixed thing. So, I loved college actually so much that I now sit on the Senior Common Room board as a Senior Common Room member, supporting the students at Drought. That's how much I loved it. So I went up there for university, and I think I probably was in my third or fourth year, and it was kind of when everyone was coupling up. And I remember I had this, it's just so funny because the whole time I was at university, I was like, I'm not marrying a farmer. Because obviously a lot of people come from the city to UNE chasing their Rachel Treasure moment, if you will, looking for that romantic kind of farmer wants a wife situation. And a lot of the signs in Armidale actually have an F in front of the A that says, so it says Farmerdale.
Yeah.
And I was like the exact opposite. I was like, no, I'm not marrying a farmer. It's not just a lifestyle. It's your whole entire life. Like, I don't want any bars of this. Must have been pretty scarred from the noughties drought with my parents. And I just was like, when they would talk about hectares, I was like, yeah, that's code for overdraft and you don't understand how these things work. And so I was quite negative about probably going back on the land myself, which is the largest joke at my wedding was Jen had one rule when she was dating, and that was no farmers, and she ended up marrying. In any case, everyone was kind of coupling up, and I remember being really quite lonely. College can also be a really lonely place when, people's weekends are now taken up with, going to the movies with their boyfriends or, not going out and partying quite as hard as what they used to and, staying in and watching movies or whatever it is. And so I actually said to my friend of mine, who shall remain nameless, that I was really lonely and that I was done and I was going to move back to Wagga and take up a job that I had been offered in a law firm down there. And I think she kind of freaked out. And so she made me an online dating profile before the years of Tinder and all the rest of it. I think they were like eHarmony or something. And I had no idea. And she came back to me a couple of weeks later and she was like, so you've met a farmer and you're going on a date. And I was like, no, I'm not. So that's how Chris and I kind of met. I remember going on a date with him and not being super into it, like I guess because it was forced on me. And then a couple of days after our first date, a girlfriend of mine said to me, is it the type of bloke that you're unsure about, but then when you see him with someone else, you're like, oh, that could have been, like I could have had that? And I guess that's kind of like very much looking over the fence, but it was pretty good advice, I guess. I watch a lot of my girlfriends looking for that real fairy tale fall off your feet kind of, BS. And I must admit it was a really slow burn with Chris and I. Like we were friends first, very much friends first. And he says to me now all the time, he's like, you made me work really hard. And I'm like, well, wasn't this mess worth it when we look around with 2 kids and, shit everywhere and all the rest of it?
Absolutely.
I guess the very, very long version of how I met Chris, and I remember he brought me out to his farm, which is quite picturesque. It's, out of town and it's quite a high elevation, so we have really lovely views. And I said to him, well, you've kind of sold me on you, but your next job is to sell me on this place because I'm not just like you come with a package deal. And I know we had a lot of chats really early on about what I wanted to do and my expectations for my life, and that I didn't just want it to be whittled down into a role that people see as farmers' wives, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Selling the farm. What was it that actually made you think, yes, I'm going to commit to him and I'm going to commit to the farm? And
I can't actually tell you that. It is a really picturesque place. We have views right up to Guyra, and then from our airstrip we can see all the way down to the Moombi. So it is really quite a panoramic view. But I think Chris kind of sold me on the balance of everything. I think when you're on farm, it can be really easy just to, like, you live, you eat, you work on the one place, and it's really easy never to venture too far or do too much. And he always really had really strong aspirations around travel and learning, and he's always been like, if I go to him with like, hey, we're thinking about doing this, what do you think? He's like, just do it, we'll make it work. Like, he's never hamstrung me, I guess. And always, like, he has a really dual role. I think a lot of farmers' wives, and I'm probably in generalising, but like, it's very easy to see that they fall onto the kids in the house and the garden, and that's great. And I do all of that. But also there's a balance with that where Chris does one day of childcare. Try not to say childcare because they're his children and it's not babysitting. Gotta change our language around that. But he does one day a week. And so he has that full day off. He looks after the kids, and it's just amazing to watch his relationship with the boys. But also that's the day I can work from 6 to 6. And I get everything done, if that makes sense. I don't feel like I come home with things that I have to try and squeeze in everywhere else. So I guess he really presented such a modern balance, which I was really worried about being on farm wouldn't be there.
That one day makes such a difference. Knuckle things out, and when you get a good workflow, that balances all you need to fill your cup.
Yeah, and I think Chris kind of thinks of his like work as more flexible. Like I know a lot of farmers are out the door at 6, and Chris will definitely be that type of bloke that's out the door at 6 if something needs to be done or he's got to do something else. But like today, for instance, I'm like, hey, I've got an interview at 10. And he's like, yeah, no worries. I'll just shift this around. And he's like, we'll have a bit of an early lunch. So I feel like there's always flexibility and ebb and flow in no one's competing demands are more important, if that makes sense. And I do the same for him. Like I'll cancel when shearing's on, I cancel the whole week of work because I have to, because he needs me to do that.
Yeah. And those open, honest communications going forward and having to be able to, and being able to plan that does make a world of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're doing something you love, it really combats against that isolation that you can feel as a rural woman on farm, particularly on farm.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive down that rabbit hole a little bit more, going into, making sure we don't feel lonely, making sure we don't feel alone. I'm sure there will be lots of the community listening who would love to know more about how you and Farmer Chris talk about what's coming up and how that's going to fit in, not only when it was just the two of you, but now you've got the kids on board as well.
Well, look, I'm very chaotic in my organisation of things. I'll like store all of the clinic data on my clinic database Power Diary, and then I'll have all of my interview stuff or my research stuff on a separate calendar. So I'm really bad at collating that. And we've tried everything, to be honest with you, everything, including a gigantic whiteboard up in our bedroom, which was just even a bigger shit show because no one wrote on the goddamn whiteboard. It just sat there. Chris and I just pretty much have a conversation about, hey, what have you got on tomorrow? And so we have a chat about what somebody else has got on tomorrow. We make a really big thing about saying, like, if there's something really important that we need the other person to cover, pre-planning that well in advance. Like, I know when shearing's going to be every year. It very rarely changes. Yeah. He knows that most of the time if I'm scheduling, because I supervise students as well, yeah. If I do that, I do that on my work day. So I make sure that, Tuesdays is the day that Chris has the boys, and then Wednesday's the day that they're in care. I try to fit it in then, and it's particularly that Tuesday where I have the flexibility to start really early and finish really late because Chris is at home with the boys. So if I don't make it home for bath, bottle, bed, it's okay because they're already at home and Chris is doing that. So I think it's around setting real parameters around that's my day, and so I'm going to utilize that day as best I can. And then just having really open conversations like, New South Wales Farmers Conference. Okay, so I'm not going to work that week. We're all going to go to Sydney and make a weekend of it. Does that make sense? So we just kind of know his commitments. He knows mine. Yeah, sometimes we have clashes and the wheels fall off, but then communicating about how it went wrong as well. I'm a really big communicator, and I probably have had more conversations with Chris that says, I don't want you to therapize me. Do not give me therapy. Because I guess in our relationship, I'll ask the hard questions a lot of the time, be like, okay, well, so how did that go wrong? Or I can see that you're frustrated. Tell me what's frustrating you. Or just constantly, and he probably finds it probably more annoying than anything else, but checking in a lot. With the mental health side of things, I think Chris and I have had to really work on that because particularly before we had kids, his whole day was by himself, not talking to anybody. And then my whole day was being everybody's therapeutic rubbish bin and just listening the whole time. And so I'd get home and he'd want to just talk at me because he was like, oh, human contact. I need to talk to you about this, and this happened, and this funny video, and, I did this today. And I'd be like, dude, I have nothing left to give. And I'd just be like, it's all white noise at this stage. So really being quite cognizant of what each other needs, and really speaking as like simple stuff like talking about our love languages. How do you receive love, but also how you give love, and making sure that marries up with your partner. So obviously, like, I'm an acts of service type of person. So the sexiest thing you can do for me is unpack the dishwasher and repack it and have it running when I walk in the door, or doing a load of washing. And so just having those really honest, open conversations with Chris about, you know, that's how I feel valued. You have seen something that I do that is super mundane, that causes me a lot of effort and a lot of brain space, and you've done it for me. You've taken that off my plate. So that allows me then to reinvest back in us and spend time with us. And I feel valued for that, and vice versa, and understanding what his are and then doing that for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And those conversations are so important. I also like a really good debrief, but that is something that we've had to work on, because it wasn't something that was done prior to myself moving to the farm 10 years ago or before having kids. So those debriefs and those conversations are so important.
It's so hard too, I think, sometimes, particularly when, you know, I think as you get older, your family farming model like changes. So when I first stepped in, Chris was very much with his dad and his mum. And as, you know, we have grown and evolved, that conversations have been less me on the side or the pillow talk as I talk about it, contributing gently to the conversation with planting seeds of ideas to actually being at the table, if that makes sense. And I think if you weren't off farm, that might be the hardest thing to adjust to, is not being a key driver in your future, if that makes sense, in the short term.
Oh, it absolutely does. And I know that so many of the community actually really struggle with that, particularly those who have been on farm and wanting to contribute for an extended period of time, and the farm's just not ready for that.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit more about that progression and how you were able to use your background farming knowledge to be able to bring that to the forefront of the conversation?
If I can be really honest, it was probably Chris and I had a discussion really early on that we wouldn't combine our finances until it was us, if that makes sense. So I always felt like I had space to do what I needed to do. I know a lot of women that are on farm, and not everybody can do this. I realise that this comes from a place of privilege, but up until probably the last 12 months, we've never had combined finances. And that allowed me to be able to pursue the things that I wanted to pursue, but also in drier times also support the farm and have a bit more of a voice, I guess. But I think it's just also the older generation knowing when it's time as well. And my in-laws have been amazing at that, knowing when to step out, particularly given that wasn't role modelled for them, because my father-in-law was so much older when he married. So they didn't have another generation above them contributing to the conversation to then have it role modelled to them. They've just done a really beautiful job of being like, okay, you guys live here. It's your time to run it. It's your boat to row. You know, it's not ours anymore. And where do you see the future? And I think we've just been really lucky to have those relationships. And relationships are really important in farms, as they are in, you know, it's hard because, you know, the royal family talk about this all the time. It's family, and then it's business as well. And I think particularly with Harry and Will and Charles, we've all seen how that can break down. And it's very similar in farming families, because everyone has an opinion. There's a pool of money, and you've got to kind of make it work. So, yeah, I think having really adaptable, open, good relationships with my in-laws and respectful relationships with my in-laws. But I really went in, Katja, not feeling like I would have a voice, or being very aware that for a period of time there would be decisions made about my life or how it affected my life, or things that would affect my life, that I wouldn't have decision-making power on. And I think acceptance of that probably is the greatest thing. It's not long-term. It's never long-term. And sometimes it can be if you set up as a trust or a company. That can be a little bit more tricky. The other thing I think is my husband's an only boy. So he has sisters. So there wasn't another bloke who wanted to run the farm, if that makes sense, because I know other people that makes it more tricky too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a couple of really important points that we've just covered. So the first one is that financial independence. So I am the same. So my husband and I have separate bank accounts because while ever I'm not part of the farming partnership, part of that farm, then I keep that separate.
Yeah, I think that's a game changer, isn't it? And that was Chris's suggestion. I think it was really, really smart. And my in-laws were really supportive of it.
And I really agree with that. So then, and it's not hidden money, and like my husband knows exactly how much is in there and what's contributing to what, because we sit down and we do our taxes and things together and all our tax returns and BASs. So we're really open and honest about that between the two of us. But as far as we're concerned, the farm doesn't need to know the personal side of that. And then the acceptance of, knowing that you won't be a key contributor initially, and that it's baby steps to get towards that, and finding the comfort in, okay, yes, there's decisions, particularly big financial decisions that the farm's making that will influence my life in the future. How do you get comfortable with that? Because I know that a lot of the community really have struggled with that. So particularly when, the farm takes out another overdraft or they take on another loan, whether that is a land loan or a machinery loan or something like that, or a cattle loan. So how do you get comfortable with that, particularly with the financials or with some of the business decisions, before you can contribute and have a voice to that?
It's really hard because what you're saying, like short term or long term down the track, you're going to inherit that. Yeah. And I think that's really, really difficult. That's really, really difficult. Having open conversations about how that's going to be covered between yourself and your husband so that you feel really, really safe, and also being able to have a voice between you and your partner so that you can voice your concerns in regards to that. I know that I've definitely had conversations with Chris, and a lot of my conversations are always prefaced with, if you're going to spend money, you need to show me how it's going to make money, because financially, it's fiscally irresponsible, as I say to him all the time, to throw a shit ton of money, because farms spend big money. Like nothing is cheap ever. Like it's not like, you Post-it notepad that's $5 that you do your tax deduction. You go to Grazing or wherever you're going and there's like a couple $1,000s gone. It's big spends, yeah?
Yeah.
So I'm always at Chris, how is this going to return? What are you going to return from this? Particularly if you're going to borrow money, how are you going to cover the cost of that? And so we always had an independent financial advisor that sat outside of the family business that was ours as a family, so Chris and I's, and that has always been great because I've been able to voice any concerns through there, and they've provided a third-party sounding board, and that has probably been one of the best financial spends that we've had throughout our time, because it allowed me to have a voice, but presented as a third party to really rearrange whether or not how our spending is fiscally responsible. So I guess it's being party to the conversation, but not at the table again. Farms are hard. Like I know a lot of girls that have moved out from the city in particular. I think if you're from farms, you watch your mum go through this as well, and, you can ask them for a bit of advice, and they will tell you that that's just the done way. And I'm a big believer of just because it's been done for 10 generations doesn't mean it's right. And I have asked that question a few times. But I guess acceptance is really, really hard. It's internalized work, isn't it? And I guess if they're taking out huge debts and you've got your own, like your name's not on it, then at the end of the day, you're not responsible for it either. So I guess, balancing that in your mind as well. You might not think it's the right thing, but also you're not responsible for it either. And whatever the financial outcome of that is, at least you have that peace of mind. It's hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm taking away from that is find something that works for you, that makes you feel comfortable in it, because you've armed yourself with the knowledge and information that you need to be able to get through as a couple and a family, not just the family farm. I think getting an outside financial sounding board like you've got is such a good move. And I know that that is a toss-up for a lot of people in the community, is they want to do that, but then where is that finances coming from contributing to that? Because they're talking about the farm and they're talking about themselves. And so it's like that grey area of where does that finance come from. Also, it is dollars well spent when you find the right person for that sounding board. And I think sometimes that unknown of, am I going to spend the initial money and this person not click with us?
Yes.
Financial situation, and are they going to get family farming businesses, because they are so complex and they are all so different.
Yeah, I must admit we're very, very lucky because our financial advisor not only is a good friend, but he also comes from farms. He's down in the city now, but he comes from farms, so he gets it. And I think realistically, now that Chris and I are operating as a partnership ourselves and moving towards what our family partnership is going to look like after the passing of my father-in-law, I think we're on a better footing because we're not starting from scratch, if that makes sense, as a partnership, because we've had these discussions with Ned in the background about structure, about finances, about moving forward, and what our plans are. And so it's not just like, oh, okay, well, where to now, if that makes sense. And they're our relationships. Like, I don't feel like, you know, the financial advisor we're using is my mother-in-law's and she's used her for a billion years and they're friends and they have coffee, if that makes sense. I feel like it's really independent advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. If you're enjoying listening along with us today and learning some tips, tricks, and advice from our ladies, then please like, subscribe, and even share this interview with someone who you think would need to hear this information or who might benefit from other interviews done right here on this channel. Now let's go back into today's episode. So, Jen, is there any other information that you would provide to the community that you think they should know or may be beneficial? If you were starting your farming journey again, you've just married Farmer Chris, what is it that you would give advice to other farmers' wives?
Oh, that's a hard one because obviously my view is like, don't do it. Look, I think when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about what do I value about the farm now. I think when I first married Farmer Chris, I was always chasing something in town. And I think the biggest blessing of COVID was stopping, slowing down and reevaluating, reappreciating the benefit of being on farm and living out of town, particularly during those COVID times, and the flexibility that came for my work with being at home. I love nothing more than looking out my window and looking down into the view now when I'm working with clients or recording my own podcast or working with students. So I think the beauty of living on farm is just so awesome. But the thing that I would say about if you're ready to go is buy a deep freezer.
Yeah.
Don't try and decide. I'm going to go real practical. Don't try and live without a deep freezer. Just do it. Buy the damn deep freezer, even if it's just one of those small ones, because you can freeze milk, you can freeze cheese, you can freeze butter. And I hate going to the supermarket. So if I'm in Sydney, I'll go to Costco if I can, which sounds terrible because it's not supporting farmers. But I buy my farmer's box and I buy all my meat. Well, we have a lot killed, but just buy the damn freezer, because you have no idea how many times I've driven to town, which is a 60k round trip, which isn't the furthest. I know that a lot of other people live a lot further, but I've had to drive in my pajamas, no bra and Crocs because it's 9 o'clock at night and I've realized there's no milk for the baby in the morning because I've just been like, I've got to get out. Clinic's finished at 6 o'clock. I just want to leave town and get home. So just buy the damn deep freezer. Just do yourself a favor. Everything freezes. It comes out pretty good, including crumpets and toast. Just buy it. Just do it. Just do it.
Absolutely agree with that. I've actually got two.
And like if you're building your house from scratch, have a mud room that goes into a bathroom. That would be my one huge tip. So they don't come through the main room.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that, and put it on the correct side of the house near the carport, because our mudroom is on the opposite side, because our mudroom is part of our laundry and it's on the side where the clothesline is, but everyone still walks through the house.
It's through the house. I know. Not the best. It's like anything, old farmhouses. So no one thought about that stuff before.
Yeah.
And renovating it could be a nightmare. So, or even getting someone to come out and renovate it, like I think is just, I think Steph, I'm going to say her last name, Schmidt, she's the rural psychologist. She does some really great mental health for work. And I just love when she shows photos of her living room or a kid's mess or just normalizes what farm life is like living. Like there's just shit everywhere. And I just really appreciate that, because by the time I come home from work, I'm exhausted, because when I add up the travel over a week, I do at least an hour every day if I'm, going every day when I was. So when I add that up at the end of the week, there's 5 hours I've lost. Now, I used to say to my husband, if I have 5 hours, I could have this place spotless. You could lick the floor, but I don't. I've lost that just to sitting in the car traveling. So I think, having those types of conversations and being really realistic with your time and where it gets eaten up by, I love that normalization of there's just shit everywhere and it's not perfect. It's not, like our houses don't look like Vogue living. Like some needs some work.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's okay.
So I think the only other thing I would add to that while we're talking about houses and renovations and things like that is if the farm office is a room in the house, put an external door on so that you don't have to get embarrassed when someone needs to come to the farm office.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. That's a really good, really good plan, actually. To be honest with you, our farm office most of the time is the kitchen table. Like that's where, all conversations are had around cake and tea. The banker comes, that's where we have it. Anybody comes on, that's where it happens. So, I don't know what I'd do if I had to take them to the office. I'd have to traipse through Eddie's toy room and God forbid. So that would be my, just by the deep freezer. Like there's a million things that, you could look back and retrospectively and be like, oh, I would do this differently. But overall, I think I don't think we learn from everything being perfect. We learn from our mistakes. I could have that conversation differently, or I'd approach this differently, or, I'd organize this a different way, or I'd get this person involved earlier. Hindsight's a bitch. And we can look back and say that, but I go the practicalities. Buy the deep freezer, have the mud room, get the outside door on your office. I think you learn from being in the muck.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we rise up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, one of your questions is like, what would be my tip for people for preparing for drought or wet times? Like, every farm is so different, like every person is so different, and how that's going to affect each individual person is totally different. Like a wet season for somebody out on the dry country might be something very different to a wet season here in the New England, because I was like, oh, wet season, we sit on our bums and we think it's awesome. Like, your sheep might get a bit wormier, you might push your shearing back if the wind's really bad, but like that's an awesome season for us, where someone else, that might be the crappiest season either. I think if you were a farm person, like if you've grown up on farm and you've experienced droughts, I think you need to be really wary when you head into a drought as an adult, particularly if you've got children at your feet, because I think the financial pressures when you live, work and eat and sleep in the one place that looks bloody terrible and you see the animals suffering, I think that is really, really tough. And particularly if you've lived it as a child, because you're talking about childhood trauma that's coming back up in your adulthood, that's you're re-experiencing the trauma. And I think being really aware of that is important. But if you've never lived through a drought, I say just hold the reins and watch it. And, I'm a big believer that surviving is thriving sometimes, and learning and just having open communication. And if everything else don't silo each other out. I see a lot of people that when they go into crisis, they become individuals rather than a team. So my biggest thing is always about communication and how do we come back as a team, is my really big thing. I think you just got to hold on to the reins and go, because you fall into two categories in drought, don't you? You either feed and incur that financial and fiscal responsibility of the cost of the feed. And there are guys out there that have been running their genetics for donkeys and they need to feed. Or you feed into the yards. I feel like you feed into the, a really oversimplification of how you respond to drought is those two things. And that's all you can do, and just prepare financially.
Yeah, or you destock and you start again at the end.
That's what I mean. Feed into the yards, as in you sell them.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yes. I think one of the most important things I did with my first drought on farm, which was the big one that we've recently just experienced, was I actually kept a day-to-day log. So, I mean, a lot of the days are the same because it is got up, fed cattle, got up, did a water run, kind of thing. So it is a lot repetitive, but I did find that there were a few gems flicking back into it, particularly when we thought we were heading for a dry season this summer, and flicking it back through it and being like, okay, so I've got down here noted, make smaller decisions more often rather than waiting to make a big decision. So instead of, the prices dropping in the market and trying to feed your cattle through the sale yards when everyone else is, it was more like, okay, this week we're going to sell 5. This week we're going to sell 10. Like, you've incurred that additional trucking fee, but the decisions aren't as hard, particularly we've got a stud operation here. So those genetic decisions are really difficult. But when you break it back down to, okay, let's use this as an opportunity to get back to a core breeding herd that is exactly what we want to breed. And I know lots of people are doing it at sheep herds, in their sheep herds and everything as well. It is, okay, what is not milking? What is not able to carry a calf? What is not pregnant? What is, those sort of decisions. If you're making those smaller decisions more often, it was much easier. It didn't feel like the world was ending. Yes. But then also, as you said, like staying as a team, having the same goals, that was a big struggle as well, because everyone feels different amounts of risk and are happy with that different amount of risk, and balancing that as a team is really important, because you don't want someone to be able to make a big decision and not feel like you had a voice in that drought, because you were already feeling isolated, you're already feeling under pressure. It's
hard. Like, drought is hard, and like I said, I feel like you fit into those two categories, or you're trying to balance between the two. But I think small decisions early, that's the benefit of hindsight, isn't it? Like, you kind of just dug in and took the reins, and I think keeping that journal probably was really, really helpful. To have that retrospective think about. Because I think sometimes when you're in survival mode, you're not cementing a lot of this to memory. You're just like, oh, how did we get through that time? I don't even remember. 2019 was horrible. Like, we had the bushfires burning on our doorstep in the gorges, and so we just were choking on smoke. Like, I remember waking up with the worst headaches. It was so dry, the driest I've ever seen in New England, and we got that way really quickly. So most of the rest of New South Wales had gone in slowly. We went in really, really quickly, and overnight it was intense. Neighbours, like we had a near neighbour who really didn't cope very well and hurt themselves. Thankfully, they survived, but then we had that layer on top as well. It was just, we had our miscarriage in September 2019. Like, it was just, I just remember it being like, oh, just the pylon. I was just like, I don't know. When will this end? And thank God that summer rainfall was really, 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 really good. Thank God. Because we went into it quickly, but we came out quickly. I'm not sure, what it would have looked like if it carried on for as long as what it did for the rest of the state.
Yeah, for us here, it was 5 years end to end. And so it was multiple missed seasons, but the fire risk in that meant that it was lower than other areas because we literally had
the benefit of that. Like those Port Macquarie bushfires, they were insane. So it all started down there and just that smoke. And I still maintain that my miscarriage in 2019 was because I choked on smoke for the first 6 weeks. And they've done a heap of studies looking at placentas of babies who were born in high pollution, smoke pollution areas, and their placentas are, not great, grainy, and a lot of preterm labours and things like that. So, trying to think of silver linings, but at the same time, it's like, oh, well, can't get kicked much more when you're down with drought than layering that kind of stuff on top. It was just really crappy time. And I think the only thing that got us through was leaning back, being the old tripod, leaning back in on each other rather than out.
Yeah. The Rural Financial Service brought out counselling for farmers at the time, which was a fully subsidised system. And I really encourage, when going into another drought, or if people are still really feeling the added on effects of drought and, other things that have happened like your miscarriage or anything like that, I always encourage, and I've written down that in my diary as well, to seek help, even if it is just a check-in and you are not feeling as if you can't handle it anymore or you can't take it anymore. Seek help early. Get into the pattern of it, start normalizing it for yourself, and that third-party help as well through a counselling service really helps as well. As someone who is sort of in that area with your own private practice, Jen, tell me a little bit more about that.
So I would actually say getting your blokes to go off to the GP, a lot of the evidence that we're seeing around particularly rural men says that they get a lot of benefit from just going off and speaking to their GP. Yeah. So I would definitely say, for instance, like we've talked about our own fertility journey and no one looked at Chris for 12 months and he had diabetes and like the worst cholesterol in the whole entire world. His doctor looked at him. He had the only other thing on his record was an asthma puffer that he'd had. And she was like, where have you been? And he was like, about. She was like, you're a heart attack waiting to happen, but also you have no testosterone because of diabetes. So you guys are infertile from that. So sending your bloke off, the evidence that they're collecting is finding that rural men really benefit just from a chat with their GP. They actually benefit from it more than going off to seeing someone. There's a lot of evidence even just booking an appointment makes you feel even better. Rural Health Connect have some really great resources because not only can you book a GP appointment, they do GPMPs, which is the Medicare. You need a GPMP to get a Medicare rebate in order to see a clinician, but you also get to pick your own clinician because I think a lot of the time good mental health is about connection and personality and being able to relate to the person that's supporting you. So being able to go on and actually look at all the bios of the psychologists that work with Rural Health Connect and then picking someone on that basis because you feel like you can, relate to them is really important, but also being able to get a GPMP because you and I both know, Katja, that accessing health in any shape or form as it is can be really, really tricky. And Armidale, for instance, has been featured on so many different platforms with its GP shortage. So we lost 13 GPs or something ridiculous like that in a really short space of time and didn't have an influx of any coming through. So it wasn't that you just couldn't get an appointment, that you couldn't get a practice if you were new to Armidale, which was really difficult. So being able to connect through Rural Health Connect, they have a lot of money associated with drought and perinatal stuff as well. Rural people are considered a health priority. So there are things out there to connect in with. The other thing I'll say is it's really easy for blokes in particular to go off to GPs who are really, really busy and jacks of all trades and be given a script for something and think that it'll make them better. And a lot of the time when I speak to my mental health clients, I'll say, you didn't get here in one day, did you? There's a lot of days that contributed to how you feel right this very minute. And so what we need to do is for every day that you felt like this, we're going to need a day, if not maybe two, to get back to where you want to be. So mental health isn't fixed overnight, and practices aren't changed overnight, particularly with, my farmer. He's very much a creature of habit. So really kind of saying to people, you can't pop a pill and make this better. The pill will help, but you have to be prepared to do the work. And the work is showing up and coming to your clinician and doing that therapy, and being prepared to stick in the mud for a while. And that's why relationships are the most important aspect of good therapy, because you've got to be willing to, you don't want to hate the person. You're not going to go or feel like they can't understand or relate. So I think they're probably the most important parts, because if you take that medication, there is a risk that it makes you feel worse. And so you've asked for help and you've taken the medication. And so you can see how this really accumulates really, really quickly. Also, talking about suicide doesn't lead to suicide. They've completely debunked that myth. So have the conversations. Be prepared. I remember when Chris was really low, I said to him once, we can have all the feelings on the outside, let's have them, but let's eat something first. So like going back to those real classic Maslow hierarchy of needs, I go with my farmer when we're in tough times. Have you eaten? Have you slept? Okay, let's address those two things first, and then let's have all the feelings on the outside and set plan from there, which always is met with, don't therapize me. And I always say, well, if you got your own therapist, I wouldn't have to wear the hat for you. But yeah, I really am quite, I think a lot of what makes me a rural woman, and that we think about rural women, makes me a good clinician, because I really go back to those practicalities. Okay, Maslow hierarchy of needs. Have you eaten? Have you slept? Do you feel safe? Do you feel secure? Okay, let's address some of those things, and then let's look at medication. Let's look at finding you a therapist, because if you're not eating and you're not sleeping, it's pretty hard to fix from there if we don't address those first two things.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of my love language, we're talking about love languages earlier, is feeding people. For me to be able to prepare a meal and feed people makes me really happy.
Me too, but my husband's a diabetic now, so I haven't baked a cake in so long. Breaks my heart. I've been out in the garden. I try to watch out that garden I think it's called Monavale Garden, so much to try and inspire me, and I get out there and dig 2 holes and I'm like, oh, bugger this, and go back inside.
Raised garden beds was the best thing I did to be able to grow more of our own fruit and veg, because while it was more effort to start, I just feel I'm not having to dig into the hard ground. I've got my perfect soil already there.
I did actually say, I was talking to somebody the other day, I can't remember who it was, but I was admiring her garden, and I was like, oh, my mother-in-law left me 1.5 acres of enclosed garden, and I kind of used the 2019 drought not to water anything and legitimize not having to go outside. And if it survived, it could stay. A lot did not survive.
Yeah, definitely finding plants that suit the area and need minimum care is great as well for a garden, because you can get some really pretty plants that just don't need care.
Yeah, my future plan, I said to her, was I get my dad to come up about a month before for 2 weeks and just get him to weed the crap out of everything. And okay, mulch it heavily and it's good for another 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's take a short break in today's episode to talk about Tupperware. Katja Williams, the ultimate farm wife, is also a Tupperware consultant. So whether you are looking for food storage containers and options, kitchenware such as microwave cooking, baking trays, knives, tools and other utensils that you can use in the kitchen, serviceware, kids items including Disney themed lunchboxes, drink bottles and toys, or other lunch and drink options such as bento boxes, travel mugs and flasks, picnic wares and sets, as well as reusable cutlery. Or even if you are eco-friendly minded and you want to use microfiber cloths or recycled products, then please click the link below in the show notes and have a look at what is on offer at Tupperware. Tupperware is also always looking for new consultants. If you want to start your side hustle or your business for off-farm income, something for yourself, then please reach out to myself, Katja Williams, the ultimate farm wife, and talk about starting your own Tupperware business or side hustle. Now let's get back to today's episode. So generally to the sort of the official end of our conversation today. So is there anything else you'd like to add to the community, or any shout outs you'd like to do for her herd?
Yes. So my biggest thing, and I live by this, is my very Irish grandmother always used to say, if you don't ask, you don't receive. And so I just think, particularly in rural areas, if you don't ask, you don't receive. So if you need help, reach out, ask the question, talk to your neighbours, make friends, best way you can, find your people, because I think sometimes it's really easy to feel like you haven't found your people. Find your people. If you don't ask, you don't receive. So I think that's really one big thing. And also, I would love if people came over and checked out her herd. We are celebrating, which is the fabric of rural communities, which is creative solutions like yourself, Katja, which is not only just the rural mum, but even the way in which you went about your birth, finding ways in which we can celebrate how, yes, we have service gaps, yes, both in primary and allied health, but how are we creatively problem solving those issues? Where can we find these nuggets of gold in our rural community of the midwife or the hypnobirthing practitioner or the private obstetrician or the physiotherapist? Where are they, and how do you give birth to your families, and how do you give birth to families with not only pregnancy but fertility when majority of the services are hundreds of kilometres away? So, so I would love if people came over and checked out the herd and became a herdie. And, we've got some fun things happening. We have 2 events happening that are about celebrating rural women's health around International Rural Women's Day, both ends of the state. So one up in Armidale, one down in Wagga. So I can't wait to announce who's going to be speaking. That's a really great mixture of lived experience and also experts. So they'll, it's all happening. I sometimes wonder whether or not I have time.
But you make it work beautifully, and we did hear earlier on in today's discussion how you did that. So thank you so much for having a chat with us today, and we will catch you on Her Herd in other future episodes.
Thank you so much, Katja, and for all you do for rural people. It's fantastic.
Thank you.